and it's comfortable. So my name is Alessandra Nilo. I am representing here the Women's Major Group as operative partner for the Latin American Caribbean region. And it is my pleasure to have all of you here today to have this conversation about feminist economy to leave no one behind. So the way we are structuring this session, before introducing our amazing speakers today, I'd like just to give you a brief overview of the session because it also gives us time to wait for more two speakers that are still coming. And then at the end, I will do some information about our housekeeping. Okay, so this is not the first conversation that Women's Major Group is promoting about the same thing. We have been stimulating governments, civil society, academia, and other players to have this conversation as a central issue for us, which is related to the fact that we do not only push for women to benefit from the development issues or to benefit for a better economy, but we want to make sure that women are recognized as a key player, a key implementer of development and, of course, sustainable development, and it's responsible also for making decisions related everything that has to do with economic. So what we want to see is really women having the place and taking the leadership in the governance process, in decision-making process at all levels, including at the international finance institutions, to help us to decide and to shape a better world, the world that we dream about when we agreed about the 2030 agenda. So as we convene, so I will read the information about this meeting. As we convene at the UN High-Level Political Forum, despite the backdrop of global challenges and the imperatives of sustainable development goals and the ambitions that we have before us, it is increasingly evident that the transformative approach is required to ensure that no one is left behind in our pursuit of equitable sustainable development and gender equality. By championing a feminist lens in economic frameworks, we aim to catalyze dialogue and action towards dismantling systemic barriers, fostering gender equality, and fostering a more just and resilient future for us. So this event, as a good example of member states and civil society collaboration, we will explore the gender implications of our current economic structures and propose concrete feminist alternatives to leave no one behind at different levels of the economy. As a follow-up to the discussions Women's Major Group had in its previous events at the High-Level Political Forum last year, 2023, during the SDG Action Weekend and the CSW 68 this year. So this event will discuss how economic reforms proposed by member states and civil society can be designed and expanded to accelerate progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, but also, of course, towards the Paris Climate Agreement, the Finance for Development, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and reflecting on how we will position ourselves as a key players within this context. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that this event is really a collaboration between the Women's Major Group, the C20, which is the Civil 20. It's one of the engagement groups that are directly working with the G20, and the Women 20, that both groups are also represented here. And what we did since the last year is to establish this bridge between those conversations. So we think that what we are saying here at the UN is absolutely important that we repeat and continue reinforcing within our messages to G20 members, to G7 members. We also did a lot of advocacy work with G7 during the CSW, during the CPD. So every place we are repeating the same, and we have our consistent messages about it. So Eliane Aquino arrived. So Eliane, please take your seat here. Yeah, so, and this is also, this event was also possible because we had also the co-sponsorship from the women's minister in Brazil. So I'd like to invite also Eliane Aquino to sit with us. She's representing the Brazilian government. And Eliane, soon I will introduce the panelists. So basically, this is the idea of this event, is to show how we have been collaborating through all these particular forums and to see what else can we do together to strengthen our voice when leading to the process in September, particularly in the summit of the future that we have seen so many challenges ahead. So I think it's also important to remind us that we are all wearing red today because today the message is that we want to have a strong gender responsive governance in all multilateral levels, but also in our own governments, in our own countries. So you are all invited to continue spreading out these messages during the day. Finally, my last housekeeping point that I'd like to do is just to remind all of us that this is a very safe space for us. So this event, besides here, we are also having an online event, and then we have translation of for Portuguese this time. But I would like to advise that no comments that are based on prejudice or violent comments or any kind of disrupting comments will be allowed. So this is a very respectful place. We need to protect our agendas and ourselves. And I'm saying that because those that are participating online should be advised that if there is any kind of no respectful comment, we need to take out them from the room. Okay, so well. We don't speak, we can speak in Portuguese and then I can translate. No problem. Você pode falar em português, ela vai traduzir. Translation. Boa tarde a todas. É um prazer muito grande. É um prazer estar aqui. Na realidade, nós estamos aqui com o ministro de Desenvolvimento Social e Combate à Fome, que é o ministro Wellington Dias, e o nosso ministério é o Ministério do Desenvolvimento Social no Brasil. E no Brasil nós estamos voltando a criar as políticas, principalmente vinculadas às mulheres.
Nós tínhamos, há alguns anos atrás, nós tínhamos o Ministério das Mulheres e que, numa última gestão, não foi encerrado. Eles acabaram com o Ministério e as políticas das mulheres tiveram um retrocesso gigantesco. Então, agora, com o retorno do presidente Lula, nós falamos muito que nós estamos numa reconstrução do nosso país. Uma reconstrução pela democracia, uma reconstrução direitos, uma reconstrução pelas políticas realmente, que são políticas que empoderam e que principalmente trabalham com a autonomia para essas mulheres. Nós temos um país onde tem é um enorme país, o Brasil tem uma diferença das suas pobrezas por conta das suas regionalidades. O país é um país de regiões muito diferentes uma das outras. E a gente construir políticas voltadas para as mulheres é fundamental. Eu coordeno um programa chamado Bolsa Família.
Hello. She works at the Ministry of Social Development in Brazil, and she was basically explaining how Brazil is now dedicated to rebuild the policies that they had put forward before, particularly after what happened during the past government that basically destroyed almost everything that we had. So the government, Lula president, is particularly committed to review the policies for gender equality in Brazil, particularly focusing on the autonomy of women, promoting the autonomy of women. The other point that she made was that Brazil is a very unequal country, so it is a big country with different regions, and each region there is a particular challenge that needs to be addressed.
Eu coordeno um programa chamado Bolsa Família, onde ele trabalha num tripé, que é o cadastro único. Nós temos um cadastro que em todos os municípios brasileiros é feito esse cadastro para a gente poder identificar as famílias com maior vulnerabilidade no nosso país. E nós temos também a área da assistência social. Então, o Bolsa Família hoje ele trabalha o cadastro único, a área do Bolsa Família e a área da assistência social. E esse programa hoje, nós estamos falando de uma média de 20,8 milhões de famílias. Dessas 20,8 milhões de famílias, nós temos uma base de 70% do programa, que são de mulheres negras, mães solos e mulheres periféricas. E esse programa é um programa de transferência de renda. E o primeiro objetivo dele é diminuir a insegurança alimentar. É fazer com que essas famílias tenham condições de uma segurança alimentar melhor. Mas, ao mesmo tempo, a gente tem muita clareza de que só o programa de transferência de renda não é o suficiente. É como se nós nos colocássemos no primeiro degrau, mas as outras políticas públicas precisam chegar na vida dessas famílias, principalmente das mulheres. Então, nós temos hoje em torno de 55 milhões de pessoas que são beneficiários do programa Bolsa Família. Eles chegam em todos os municípios brasileiros, nos 5.570 municípios brasileiros. E nós temos também outras áreas dentro do Ministério que também está trabalhando muito fortemente com as mulheres. Uma é a área de cuidados, que é coordenada pela Laís Abramo, e que ela olha muito mais para essas mulheres que muitas vezes são as cuidadoras das pessoas que têm dentro de sua família, um idoso, uma pessoa com deficiência, e que muitas vezes essas pessoas que são os cuidadores, elas abrem mão da vida para cuidar de outras pessoas. Então, nós estamos construindo uma política pública também para olhar para essas pessoas.
Okay, so she was explaining that the program that she coordinates benefits 20.8 million of families, benefiting a total of 55 million people. and among them, 70% are women, Black women, single mothers, and the objective of the program is mainly to guarantee food security for them. But also, they know that it's not enough, but that guaranteed food security is the first step, and then it is combined with a number of other policies that together will bring and promote more capacity to women to respond and address their needs. They are also having now a new sector within the program, which is to look into the care economy, or to let's say to contribute to care economy conversations by putting attention, special attention to women that are taking care of their families in the different conditions, which is also part of the conversations that we'll have today. So to conclude.
Eu só falar para vocês que é uma grande honra estar aqui, sabe? E principalmente a gente discutindo pautas extremamente importantes que envolvem as mulheres, que envolvem as crianças, que envolvem principalmente a juventude. O governo brasileiro tem uma responsabilidade gigantesca com esse público. E nós sabemos que o presidente Lula tem isso de uma forma muito forte, fazendo com que o recurso chegue nas mãos das pessoas que mais precisam e, principalmente, fazendo com que a gente consiga diminuir a desigualdade no nosso país, que ainda é tão forte. Então, nós nos colocamos, enquanto governo brasileiro, nós nos colocamos completamente à disposição de todos vocês para trocarmos experiências, conhecermos os que vocês estão fazendo também dentro dos seus países e, principalmente, vocês também conhecerem o que o Brasil está fazendo. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. So she's thanking us for the opportunity of being today here to share and to exchange the experience, but she'd like to reinforce the Brazilian government's commitments to really continue supporting women, particularly in relation to their capacity to be an actor, not only benefiting from the policies, but to be an actor for those policies, and that whatever we need, the government is available, and it will be a pleasure to continue working with us. So thank you so much for this, and applause to the government. This is very hard to read because the numbers in Brazil are so big, right? So thank you very much. So with that, I think it's the right moment to give the floor to Foteini Papagioti. She's the Deputy Director of Advocacy and Policy at ICRW. She's the focal point of the C20 working group on women, and she has also been our leader in the women's major group, trying to push forward this agenda of how to make sure that the international financial institutions will really open the doors and the ears and their hearts to understand that we should be there, right? Making the right decisions. But also, Foteini, it would be important that she's really here representing the C20 groups and to share with us more of the recommendations that you put forward to the Sherpas in Brazil.
Thank you, Alessandra, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you all today, and I think it's very important to have these conversations across our movements and engagement groups. As Alessandra mentioned earlier, this is a continuation of an ongoing conversation that the Women's Major Group has hosted since the last General Assembly on a gender-sensitive financial architecture. And it's great to be here today to discuss how this advocacy from the Women's Major Group informed our work, particularly in the Gender Equality Working Group of the C20 process, and vice versa, how we all plan to bring forward these messages in our advocacy across our constituencies. We know that often gender is not holistically included in conversations around macroeconomic, fiscal, and trade policies. So the better coordinated we are in our advocacy, the more likely that these gender-sensitive policies will be adopted. We also appreciate Brazil's leadership in the G20 this year. There has been a very strong focus on the global economy, the global financial architecture. They have brought together experts on global taxation, on going beyond GDP as measures of growth and development and climate financing, reforming the international financial institutions. There have been many critical conversations, and we hope that the Brazilian government can continue facilitating these conversations and opening up spaces for feminists, feminist economists, to be having these conversations with the actors, that the policymakers and the actors that make those decisions. Finance ministries, development cooperation organizations. So the 2024 progress report on the SDGs tells us that most of SDG 5 targets are either marginally progressing or they're stagnating. So with current trends continuing, by 2030, we'll have over 340 million women and girls still in extreme poverty. 1 in 4 are expected to be moderately or severely food insecure. We know that the next generation of women will still spend, on average, 2.3 more hours per day on unpaid care and domestic work than men. And we generally know that progress toward closing gender gaps in education, employment, remuneration, participation in decision-making, and leadership is painstakingly slow. These gendered inequalities are intrinsically linked to broader structural and macro level inequalities, including rising debt, particularly in low and middle income countries, fiscal consolidation policies and stringent conditionalities, regressive taxation, global tax avoidance, innovation, and illicit financial flow. They all have an impact on the human rights of all women and girls, including their right to work, to social security, to adequate housing, to health and reproductive health. They're also linked to gender-based violence and violence against women and girls. It has been estimated that we need an additional $360 billion per year to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment across key global goals. At the same time, the Tax Justice Network has estimated that low-income countries are losing $47 billion annually to wealthy corporations. And the Malala Fund estimates that this is equivalent to over 20% of education budgets. According to a recent report by UNCTAD, there are 3.3 billion people living in countries that are spending more on interest payments than in education and health. For example, in 2021, debt service was 171%, the cost of all spending on healthcare and education and social protection in low-income countries. Therefore, a gender-responsive financial architecture is critical for accelerated action to meet the SDGs and translate the financing for development agenda into tangible gains for all women and girls. So in the working group on women's rights and gender equality in the C20, which I co-led with my colleagues Camila Moraine from the International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Americas and Caribbean Regional Office, and Carolina Almeida, who is the International Advisor of GELEDES, the Black Women Institute, we envision the international financial architecture based on the principles of economic justice, placing human rights and well-being over growth in GDP, framing economic activity as a means toward the achievement of human rights, and focusing on the centrality of care work, which upholds and enables all other productive work. So we recognize that achieving economic justice and rights is foundational to the broader goal of gender equality and women's empowerment, and that in turn fosters inclusive growth. However, full economic empowerment requires of policies and systemic reforms across multiple dimensions, including labor rights, the care economy, financial access, social security, and then broader reforms to the international financial architecture and governance, as Anthony, to support investments in social protection and gender equality. And of course, all of these reforms must be centered around the needs of those women and girls experiencing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. So the C20 steering committee was very intentional about ensuring gender equality as a cross-cutting issue across all the thematic priorities of the C20 communique. So in our working group, to avoid duplication, we didn't focus so much on the broader structural macro level issues, but we centered our recommendations around a comprehensive approach to care, strengthening labor rights and social protection for all, regulating global supply and value chains, improving access to financial services, markets, and capacity building, and addressing regressive taxation. With regards to care, we call on the G20 governments to apply the 5R framework, recognize the value of care, reduce the disproportionate share of unpaid care work performed by women and girls, redistribute care responsibilities equitably between men and women, and then between the family and the state, reward and represent paid care workers, ensuring decent work and social protection, including for migrant workers. And we also call for investments in the collection and use of relevant data, including time use data, and the development of methodologies to accurately measure the contribution of unpaid care work to GDP. On labor rights and social protection, we focused on adopting and enforcing international labor standards, including on fair and equitable wages, decent work, safe working conditions that are free from violence and harassment, the right to collective bargaining, and also on rights-based universal social protection policies, including parental leave, healthcare, social safety nets, pensions, and measures to ensure gender equality in the labor market. Of course, these go hand in hand with efforts to protect women workers from exploitation, violence, and harassment. Also include provisions to hold corporations accountable for labor rights violations in their supply and value chains, and also to ensure access to effective grievance and reporting mechanisms for workers. Finally, we called on G20 governments to facilitate access to markets and credit for women-led enterprises and small and medium enterprises, encourage gender-sensitive public procurement, provide adequate training opportunities to reduce education and digital gaps for women and girls, and make sure that trade agreements have a gender perspective, taking into account how trade policies can promote or actually negatively impact gender equality, and take appropriate measures to address those limitations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Foteini. It was a result of many hours and many meetings, and it was a very hard work. And just to say that in the C20, all groups, the 10 working groups, they have the obligation to think through gender lens. So all recommendations are also considering the gender perspective. And you can find them at the c20brazil.org. Brazil, in this case, with S. So everything is there, so you can take a look and to see the recommendations. So thank you so much. And then I'd like to invite Janaina Gama. Janaina is the co-head of the W20, which is the engagement group within the G20 that there is always focusing on women. It is a little bit different from the women's groups within the C20 because there they also have entrepreneurs, people that are doing, women that are doing small business, etc. And it's different from the C20 because the C20 just have civil society organizations participating. But this year we had a strong collaboration, and Janaina is also one of the co-sponsors of the session. So welcome, Janaina.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, boa tarde in Portuguese. I'm very happy to be here. Such an honor to be here representing W20. It's such an honor to be here today because, like Alessandra said, we are organizing this event together with C20, together with the federal government of Brazil, with the Ministry of Women, the Women's Major Group. Thank you so much for being here. Such an honor. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm going to read my answer because I won't forget any detail that is very important, and I can't speak slowly, and then you can understand my English. That's not so good. Thank you so much. So, the W20, like Alessandra said, is one of the official independent engagement groups of G20. We are focused on promoting gender equity and women's economic empowerment. Our working groups prioritize 5 things. First one, entrepreneurship and access to capital. Second one, care economy. Third, gender-based violence. Fourth, climate change, climate justice. And 50, women in STEM. All of them taking an intersectional analytical approach. This approach, intersectional approach, is critical for us for understanding Brazilian gender inequality because Black and Indigenous women in Brazil face more inequality. And we need to guarantee that no woman is left behind. No woman is left behind. So we have just concluded our recommendations for G20 leaders. They are very similar to what was said by Foteini. They are, first one, create a G20 care economy and support a plan that improves national care systems and addresses unpaid and informal care economy. Second, guarantee a gender-responsive approach in all climate change policies, actions, and nationally determined contributions, ensuring meaningful representation of all women, especially indigenous. Third, reduce the gender digital divide by 2025, developing and adopting global ethical AI principles that include gender lens to ensure equality and prevent bias, and investing in gender transformative programs which address the barriers women face. Fourth, a lot of work, right? Increase women's access to domestic and international markets by implementing gender-responsive public and private procurement and international trade and e-commerce initiative. Fifth, increase access to capital for women entrepreneurs through all different stages of growth by requiring and driving development banks, commercial banks, think tanks, and government to target and increase funds for women. Six, eliminate gender-based violence and feminicide in all forms, home, work, in conflict settings, economic and technology facilitated gender-based violence too. And the last one, and very important too, to ensure that the G20 captures the return on investment from investing in women on a G20 level and a national level by tracking and funding all initiatives agreed to in a leaders' declaration. So, besides that, we sent some recommendations explicitly to the G20 finance ministers and central bank heads to address, and I think it's very important to share with you. The first, repeat some words that I have said before, but the first one is about care economy, is to recognize the care economy as a formal economic sector and address unpaid and informal care work through meaningful and sustained investment. Investing in care as a sector improves the human capital of the country enables more women to participate equally in the workforce, creates jobs, build pensions, and contribute to overall growth of the global economy. The second one is about gender-based violence. Is agreed to establish a dedicated G20 fund to support global action to prevent and end the violence, including the violence that happens in technology environment. Third, climate funds require a gender lens for the use of climate funds and requires that significant funding be directly invested in women's business and women-led climate projects. Fourth, women's access to markets. Increase access to gender-responsive public procurement and private sector procurement. Fifth, require and stimulate developed banks, commercial banks, fund banks. It's very important to provide economic and tax-based incentives for investors who invest in women entrepreneurs and also critical sectors. Close gender digital divide, so increase funds for access and meaningful connectivity and to contribute equality to economic growth. And last one, very important to measure. It's very important to measure the investment in women at a collective G20 level and at a national level by tracking and reporting on funding initiatives agreed to in leaders' declarations. For us, it's very important to dedicate funding to National Statistics Office for Sex Disability Data, Gender National Action Plans, and create a G20 Gender Outcome Dashboard for evidence-based policy making and advancing G20 gender equality. A lot of work, right? So let's do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yanaina. Just to let you know that one of the concerns that we have, both groups, C20 and Women's 20, to have been put forward that to G20, is that depending on what they will decided to include in their communique, they need to implement the commitments already made on the multilateral forums. So we don't want them trying to reinvent the wheel. So we are very concerned that the language that they are agreeing are not language that are weakened than the language that we had approved in those spaces. And we are keeping pushing for, policy coherence and alignment between G20 members and the multilateral systems that we want to see strengthened in this process. So with that, I think it's very interesting to hear now Armine Yalnizyan. She's economist and Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers and with the delegation of Canada. And she will talk to us a little bit about what it means to be a feminist government, what it takes to achieve measurable changes in women's life, and we'll bring to us some examples from Canada so we can also get inspired and continue this conversation. You have the floor. Welcome, Armine.
My name is Armine, and thank you very much for including me in this terrific session. And I've learned so much in the time I have been here. I don't usually travel in these circles, so it's quite fascinating hearing the stories from around the world, especially from organizations that are dedicated to work beyond being able to visit. So what do we mean by a feminist government? Why are we even talking about feminist governments? It's a reaction to 40 years of trickle-down economics. It's a reaction to governments that have put primacy on making more money and giving more money to those who already have money because they generate more wealth. So it is exactly an inversion of what we have all been living through for 40 years. But a gentle reminder that when we came out of the Second World War, a very male-dominated world, basically had feminist governments everywhere. If you look at the agenda of what they were doing for people, to increase social protections, to increase social security, to actually advance opportunities for many people from the bottom up and the middle down, you will see that, in fact, most of our advances towards progress happened in the first 20 years after the Second World War. In many countries, in many of the countries that were involved in the Second World War, which are primarily the rich ones. And then we started this terrible global north, global south problem. But that's a different story. What's the feminist government mean? Well, first of all, I just want to remind you of who are feminist governments. It starts with political representation. And we have just a handful of countries that have over 50%, at least 50% of the people representing the people who are elected. We only have a handful of countries that have 50% of the elected representatives who are women. Rwanda, Cuba, Nicaragua, Mexico, New Zealand, and the United Arab Emirates. And we have 27 heads of country out of 180 in the world. We only have 27 heads of country who are women. We increasingly are seeing women at the heads of financial organizations that are international. That's cool. But the people that people are electing to serve them, very few women. In the case of the people who are in cabinet, who are making decisions around the table, we only have 27 countries who have at least 50% of the people sitting at the table making decisions on behalf of you who are at least equal. So we have a long way to go to find political representation. I'm going to get to this at the very end, because political representation is where it starts and where it ends. Not just with elections, but with political voice and civil society pushing for change. It goes a little bit to what Eliana was saying about how things can be reversed in 4 years. It depends on what the people say they want their governments to do. And what the people want is not just who they elect, but what it is that they organize themselves around. Okay, the second thing, other than political representation, that is a hallmark of a feminist government is the data collection that, I'm sorry, I forgot your name already, Janaina was talking about, and in fact was addressed elsewhere. Being able to measure what counts. Women are so often invisible in the stories because of unpaid work, but because they don't have any voice. Because their stories aren't at the boardroom tables, their stories aren't at the council tables, they are not at cabinet tables. We so rarely count the things that matter to women. And so data collection, data disaggregation, and also the way we reflect society back to itself through our official statistics. And again, what we count, data is incredibly important. Third thing that really matters is the programs that make a difference in people's lives. So the also familiar, right? So all the things that actually make life livable for people, healthcare, dental care, childcare, supports for people that are doing the unpaid care. All of these things make such a difference to daily lives. What are you doing in terms of those programs? What are you scaling up? What are you scaling back? The last thing I will mention as the 4 hallmarks of a feminist government are actually show me the money. How much are you putting into it, right? How much money are you putting into it? Are you increasing the money? Are you decreasing the money? What are you cutting? What are you adding? And those are the hallmarks of a feminist government. Does Canada, who calls itself the first feminist government of Canada, count as a feminist government? Well, kind of, yeah. So I was the one that coined the term that you have heard around the world globally, the she-cession, and because of my monitoring of how the pandemic hit women harder than men economically, as well as in terms of unpaid care, I was put on some kind of a panel by our feminist government and watched how in the initial stages of this administration, we did have a feminist government. We had a government that was dedicated to better data disaggregation and forced our statistical agency to actually produce more information, reversed the decision of a previous government to stop the long-form census, which was the way we looked into very disaggregated data, including time use data, right? But the previous government wanted to kill it. This government, when it was elected, it was its first act as a government to bring back that long-form census. And it continued by adding money to child benefits, which help women, more especially single moms, more than it does people that are more affluent, putting billions of dollars in that, much more than anybody had been asking for in the anti-poverty movement, in the childcare movement. We were all shocked the day this number came out in the budget, in their very first budget, which did effectively reduce child poverty, which is now on the rise again because of what has happened to housing prices and inflation. We saw this government introduced for the first time after 50 years of asking a national approach to childcare across the country, which was available but in very different ways across our 13 different jurisdictions. So it took them 50 years to say yes, and they said yes, and they put money in it. And I will, if you want to ask me questions, I can tell you what happened. Money isn't enough, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. They extended parental leave for people that on unemployment insurance so that more people could take more time off to be with their children, but at a rate of 55% of your previous earnings, which meant that poor women were never going to do it. So there's a lot, they didn't do much of a violence against women in a period of COVID when we knew violence went up. They didn't do much about housing until 6 months ago when they decided it was a crisis, and so they poured money into housing, but we won't see that impact for maybe years, because I don't think they did it with affordability at the front and center. So are they a feminist government? They're more feminist than any government Canada has had, no question about it. 50% of the cabinet is women. Our finance minister and our deputy prime minister is a woman. Women have headed up serious positions, not just like show pony positions on the cabinet tables. They have been
depends on like the range it falls in, but it does differ by room and things like that. But it's not sort of, there's no cost as far as you have to pay security or things like that. It's more the cost.
politics can Second World War loved progressive programs, but the people demanded it. So it put everybody in a type of box. The care economy has been a consistent theme in every session that I have heard. The care economy is the future because of population aging at a global level. And if we do not deal with it as nations who are united to deliver what people need when they need it, then we will have failed our job. And we will not get the governments we need or deserve.
Very good. Thank you so much. Just thinking here how we depend also not only on feminist governments, but on the democratic systems. We need to protect democracy at this point, because otherwise there will be no space for us to reclaim people's power. And also on data, always reminding us that what we measure is always a political decision, right? So with what we have seen in the past years is also, even when we produce data, when we show the data, governments do not respond to the data that we are producing. And in case of some key populations like LGBTQI people or human rights defenders, there is also a deny of the data that we put in front of them. So it's always a political context defining what the governments will do or not to do. So with that, I'd like to invite Mahinour Elbadrawi, Interim Co-Director of Programs at the Center of Economic and Social Rights, and to talk to us from the point of view of being a feminist, how feminists, the colonial and green grant-based approach to the international financial architecture will look like? And what are the concrete steps that you need to take in order to achieve that dream?
Thank you so much, everyone. It was a pleasure being here, such an invigorating session. And I just want to preface my remarks with the context that this year marks 80 years since the inception of the Bretton Woods system. It was shared earlier. This is a system that comes out of colonial practice where those who stole resources from the global south have set the rules of how international financial architecture shall run, and that was and continues to be a largely male-dominated system where $1 equals one vote, irrespective of where that money came from. So at CSR, our strategy is to work with partners, allies across different movements, the feminist movement, decolonial and green movement, coming from the conviction that we need all hands on deck to really shift the future and not to get into another 80 years of where we've already been. So we have been working in a coalition with a number of partners and allies through the past few years to really think about what does it mean concretely when we say feminist, rights-based, a green and a decolonial economy that works for people and planet and that leaves no one behind. So we worked with a number of leaders from those different fields across 5 different regions. And if we can, using different tactics that really speak to the strength of each organization, moving from the type of work that is at different levels, using different tactics, with the end goal to shift the power imbalance that's embedded in the global financial architecture to create a more equitable rights-based economy that dismantles the system of oppression that got us to where we are today. So if we could skip, I will not read this word to word, but I would just like to highlight really quickly what are the aspects of this potential change. What is the aspect of what is rights-based and what is decolonial and what is feminist? So this vision, or it needs to really be transformative, meaning that it needs to reject business as usual and depart from solutions that are reproduced today in the same structures and systems that carry the historical injustices and colonial legacies that have created the inequalities between and within countries, and where women and girls suffer disproportionately. For a system to be rights-based, it means that it is not based on charity, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, that we recognize that human rights provide a normative framework, meaning that it tells the world what the economic policy should look like, and that the economy has an instrumental relationship to human rights, meaning without the resources that come from the economy that are raised, allocated, and spent equitably, we cannot realize rights. So there are obligations under the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 2, Sub 1, that say that all states have a duty to mobilize maximum available resources to progressively realize rights, and that those cannot, we cannot step back on those. So that means that, in today's conversations about tax and debt, we need to think about those obligations, and also that states have extraterritorial duties that mean that they should not violate those rights within their own states, but also through different mechanisms in which they act, like in their capacity as member states of RFIs, or as sovereigns over where private or transnational organizations or transnational corporations are based. And human rights also gives us the principles of non-discrimination, where women, girls, indigenous people, historically colonized people have a right to freedom of self-determination and freedom from systemic discrimination that keeps them in poverty and in prostitution. So that also gives us an idea about what our decolonial lens means. It means that we need to acknowledge and address the disproportionate burden that falls on countries that are currently developing. It's not by accident that some countries develop and others are developing and cannot catch up when they're all trying to reach development dream. But they're recognizing that also the system is built in a way that where there's no playing level field in the international financial architecture today. The way Germany borrows is not the same way that Kenya borrows. It's not the same way that different countries borrow, and that comes from historical circumstances. What does that mean concretely in the opportunities that we have today in conversation around debt, climate finance, the tax, UNTC as an opportunity to equitably raise resources? And what does that mean for women? It means that we need, again, to recognize that was shared earlier, the responsibilities and to redistribute care work, and also look at care rights. So it's really both. It's care economy and the rights of those who provide care. Need to rethink contributory models that are provided by the World Bank and OECD proposals that really favor high income employment and exclude many women in global south countries where that's really does leave them behind. And then we really need to think about what systems allow for civil society and for people's voice and for women to exercise the right of self-determination. If we look at the OECD is the old colonial club. If global south countries are sitting as observers, we don't have a mandate to implement human rights. More so, conclude, please. Okay. So we have more chance, not to say that the UN system is perfect, but there's more chance for better, more meaningful participation that respects not just economic and social rights, but rights that incorporate things like freedom of self-determination and and the potential of writing historical. So I will stop here.
Thank you so much. So now I'd like to invite Barbara to take her seat on the table. Barbara Adams, she's the chair of the board of the Global Policy Forum, and with Barbara we have been sharing different perspectives and conversations in the last years, and we have been talking, as we have talked today in the sessions, around the necessity of having alliances among the different movements, finding synergies, building bridges in as a necessary way forward for us. We also talked about having tailored approach, so in different space, considering the political scene behind us. We have been talking a lot also about how to link the international debates with the national debates and how to build those bridges, right? We have been talking about resources, finance, the role of private sector and how we can change this completely outdated economy that we have so far. So Barbara, please join us and share your thoughts about what are the barriers, but also what are the possibilities that we have in order to make really this change and to achieve a very gender responsive economy at some point in our history. Welcome.
I think I've followed it longer than I do. Apologies, first of all, about the mystery that maybe you were witnessing while I was kind of hiding over there. I just come from dental surgery and my numbness is still partially with me. And it doesn't affect my thinking, but it might have. And also, I mean, the question here is huge, okay? I mean, if I started listing the barriers, we'd be here forever. We know them, right? Those of us who've worked as feminists in all these areas for a long time, we really understand structural barriers because they are both individual and institutional and structural and so on. And so what I'd like to do is to just pick on a couple of things that relate to what people have already been speaking about. And I want to kind of weave it a little bit with a couple of opportunities. Opportunities, I think, isn't always quite the right word. But now that I've already heard previous speakers who have to say we have to keep working on this and be out on the street, you won't be surprised to hear that some of my opportunities mean you have to really make sure that we are all better represented in multilateral fora, where basically decisions on COVID, decisions on climate are based for most of us where we live, not me, but the negatives we feel are not created in our lives of violence. And so we're also very badly represented in cross-border, in external policy spaces, and I want to mention and add a couple of those to the conversation. I think we all know about the veto in the Security Council. Unfortunately for us at the barrier level, we have veto-like instruments all through multilateralism and all through, for example, we've heard about the International Monetary Fund. The decision-making there is $1, one vote, and therefore dominated by very few. In terms of the trade conversations and issues to do with access to vaccines, which are essential for our public health. We know recently what's been happening, and this thing called intellectual property rights, whereby they've got to be able to get your vaccine at the market price, or be seen as a victim and a beneficiary of someone else's generosity. It's completely wrong. And so we have a number of barriers in all kinds of things that we're caring about. I want to add a couple just to depress us. We've been talking quite a lot here about measurement. You know, the biggest measurement of all that is a real problem is GDP, gross domestic product. If we actually look at which countries are defined as wealthy and successful, it's measured by GDP. If you look at policies to do with, you don't measure increased inequalities, you measure growth. Yeah. And we are living in a world today where, with regard to growth, this GDP basically invisibilizes the care economy that we know is so important. Unpaid care isn't in GDP. In countries which are heavily, their employment is heavily the informal economy, that is undervalued and often not even counted if you're not registered in the social protection system. GDP is a major, major problem. Not only is it, yes, it counts economic activity, any economic activity. So it counts. If you don't cut down the trees, it doesn't count. You cut down the trees, it counts. If you don't have an oil spill, it doesn't count. If you have an oil spill, it counts because it brings a lot of work. There are tons of examples like this. So not only is GDP not neutral, it actually rewards and incentivizes the wrong things. If you give massive bonuses to the bosses of corporations, then it looks that gets added to the GDP. If you pay someone less than minimum wage for doing the same work as someone else, that actually doesn't reflect, that work does not reflect in the same way as the GDP. So this kind now, statisticians have been fiddling around with this number for quite a long time. Here comes an opportunity which will drive you all mad because you're going to have to deal with these numbers. There is this language now called beyond GDP. And it is on the political agenda of these meetings around the UN for the first time on the political agenda. So there's more and more recognition that this also needs to be addressed, that how we measure really defines what we think development is, defines whether or not we even respect human rights. Now, there's a very interesting report that's just come out this week from the Special Rapporteur on Poverty, Olivier de Schutter, and he's included in this report needing to get over what he calls, I would love to quote him because it's a nice quote, but I might not be able to find it. I think he tells us we've got to get over our fetish or fantasy or something with GDP, and the recognition of the complete bias and discrimination within it. So that is one I want to mention. The second thing I want to quickly mention is that I think affects a lot of what we're talking about is where, and I think you brought it up, I think the major flaw that we have in the work that we do it in all different kinds of ways. The major barrier, not the flaw that we do, but the barrier for us to having more success, is the enormous gap between the policy worlds of human rights, the policy worlds of economics, the policy worlds of the understanding of what is security, and the policy worlds of development. I think we sometimes think development is that space that somehow or other connects the economics with the human rights. And if you unpack it, that's just not there. Development cooperation is all about voluntary contributions from so-called rich or developed countries to others. It's that colonial mentality that has been referred to in many ways. And unless we really recognize that development cooperation is an obligation, not a voluntary, unless we start to see an understanding of the rights to basically not the duty to contribute and the right of the recipient to define. Because at the moment, the way that we go about this, the way that it's financed, the way there's a complete pick and choose menu, oh, I'll do this, but I won't do that. And then when you start to actually look at some of the questions that have been taking place and mentions about the business of voting, basically, a lot of governments that come in power are still representing corporations, even if they didn't vote for them in that regard, because they've also got caught in this kind of understanding of how you grow and how you develop. You got caught in that mindset. And where's the opportunity? I think the opportunity is that the failure, this is a horrible thing to say, the complete failure of multilateralism that is evident in so many ways means that people are at last recognizing that the failure is governance. The failure is the level of decision making. The failure is not that we can't design good programs. The failure is not that we're making improgress. The decision making itself is the failure. And the governance that affects the UN and the governance of the international financial architecture, these were rules that were put in place in 1944 and 1945 when only 51 of the countries in the world today were politically independent.
Yes.
That needs to change.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I'm quite thinking about what to do because we just have 3 minutes to finish. I don't know, Senaz, if you can stay for a little.
We could extend till 2:45.
Excellent. So let's open the floor. Yes. So let's open the floor for 2 or 3 comments, 1 minute maximum, please. And those who want to speak, please come here so you can pick up the mic and it will be faster. Name of organization and question. Yes, come. Stay here so it'll be easy. Hi, thank you. That's really excellent. My name is Alice Ridge. I'm from Australia, from WTA and the Australian Feminist Foreign Policy Coalition. I want to add 1 comment and 1 question. The comment is just picking up on the last presentation. Something that really radicalized me on GDP is a paper that we were looking to publish through our issued paper series on feminist foreign policy by Nilo and Sarah Cook, who are really excellent feminist economists, about the way in which GDP as a concept was invented and made up. And it really emphasized to me, like, we made this up. It's not a thing that exists. Men made up what is GDP, what's in and what's out. Those were decisions that were taken. It's totally arbitrary. And if we made it up, we can make it up differently. So that was my comment. And my question is, something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is in transforming economic systems and particularly with unpaid care, there's real tendency to, you want closer, okay. This tendency to try and integrate women into existing systems because that's where the power sits currently and there's an immediate need. Women need money. That's what power looks like in the world as it is today. But sometimes we risk reinforcing the hierarchy between paid and unpaid work and kind of reinforcing the system, but just including more women in it. And I think that's what we've done in Australia successfully, is that we've massively included women into the formal economy to the extent now that it's impossible not to have a double income arrangement if you want to own property. And so there's all these ways in which we haven't really shifted unpaid work onto men, which means they're also missing out on the fundamental connections of humanity. And so I'm interested in the panel's reflections on how we can do this without reinforcing that hierarchy. So that was long.
I'll try to make my question quick. I'm also from Australia. I'm working for an NGO that's faith-based and we do women and girls' rights advocacy. My question is about the care economy. I get a little bit confused when people talk about it. I understand the need to recognize unpaid care, but I guess if we do recognize it, government say, okay, we have a lot of this. What happens at home? Like once you recognize it, then what changes?
So 1 more question, perhaps. Please.
Hi, my name is Reverend Phyllis Ochilo from Kenya. I'm working with a faith-based organization. And coming from my tradition of faith-based, I would say, let the church say amen to everyone that you said. I don't have necessarily a question per se, but I just want to know, well, maybe it is a question. How do I buckle you up and convey all that has been said to those that we work with in the grassroots community? At the same time, I feel like I've just received a PhD this afternoon in what, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half based on all that you've said, because you've given me so much to look up and continue to read about and continue to inform myself so I can move on this. So I say thank you to each and every one of you.
Applaud. Thank you so much. I think we are sharing the same feeling that we are learning so much from each other. So this is very helpful to hear. So with that, I'd like to come back to our panelists, perhaps giving 2 minutes to each one to make their response, but also their final comments.
Então, eu queria só agradecer e falar que nós estamos numa responsabilidade muito grande com o mundo, né? Na hora quando a gente vê a necessidade de realmente de mudarmos as estratégias políticas que estão sendo construídas, nós precisamos entender onde que nós deveremos realmente investir nos nossos países. Quando a gente fala em economia de cuidados e que ainda pouca gente, poucos líderes que comandam os nossos estados e os nossos municípios ainda entendem sobre isso e implementam políticas voltadas para isso, onde muitas vezes o recurso gasto com as guerras, com armamentos, são muito maiores do que qualquer outro que fale realmente para as políticas de cuidados, para as nossas novas gerações, para as nossas mulheres, para a população negra, para a população indígena. Então, nós sabemos o quanto que nós ainda temos um desafio grande no nosso mundo. E o Brasil é um país de 210 milhões de habitantes, como eu falei aqui, com uma vulnerabilidade ainda muito grande, mas, ao mesmo tempo, uma potência enorme, uma potência econômica, uma potência de população, uma potência de produção de alimentos, mas que a gente ainda tem muitas vulnerabilidades a serem ainda resolvidas. Então, eu quero falar para vocês que eu queria muito estar aqui nesse grupo desde o início da formação dele, porque o pouco aqui que deu para perceber o quanto que vocês estão trabalhando já de uma forma muito concreta. E eu quero, com certeza, chegar aqui e ficar mais tempo com vocês para poder aprender e estar junto com vocês nesse grupo. E eu pensando nas nossas mulheres, nas nossas meninas e nas nossas jovens. Muito obrigada por estar aqui.
Thank you. Obrigada muito. Muito obrigada, Liane. She mentioned how big is the responsibility of the government in Brazil, particularly when trying to change the political strategies before us, to address the challenges before us. So it requires, in her opinion, really to rethink about where to invest. So changing the strategies will also imply redesigning the investment priorities. Also, she mentioned how it's concerning when we are discussing care economy to consider that only few leaders are really understanding what we are talking about when we are mentioning care economy. And instead of paying attention to that, those leaders prefer to invest in wars, in more guns and more way to track people's lives. And the challenge it's really big. So for Brazil, for instance, when we have 200,000 million people, more than 200,000 million people, the level of vulnerability is also too high, but at the same time, the potentialities, the promises there are also high. So the issue is how to have the political decision to implement the responses that are needed. And she'd like to thank us for the opportunity of being with us. She loved this moment, she learned a lot, and she wants to be part of our group and to continue this dialogue with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. For us in W20, one of the recommendations is to create and provide system care systems and address unpaid, not only unpaid care work, but informal care work too. So one of the biggest recommendations are these are tackling not unpaid work, but informal work too that happens inside homes. And to finish, and I would like to thank so much this opportunity to be here with these amazing women and with you two amazing women that are here today. And I would like to finish because we are talking about the high level, high level, high level political forum and the summer of the future, the next event, right? And talking about the future, and I would like to bring some thought that if the sum of the future is a space in which world leaders seek to improve the present to save the future, they need to understand that the present continues to exclude women. And if nothing is done, the future will continue in the same way. So there is no way we can discuss the future without discussing gender equality. And the future needs to be feminist. So thank you so much.
Amen, sister. I want transformation as much as anybody else in this room wants transformation, but transformation doesn't work just one direction. There are people with deep pockets and much power that want to transform the world to serve them even more as we are pushing towards a more feminist, more rights-based, more human agenda. So don't forget for a minute that all the energy that is in this room that wants to transform the world is being faced with an amount of power and money that we have never seen concentrated in the way it is. And we've been talking a lot about unpaid care, but can I just tell you that in the global north, paid care is going to be the story. And it won't come from the people that were born in those countries. It'll come from the global south because we are aging out. And the story of exploitation is waiting to be plucked by private equity. I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but money does make the world go round. So do women. So can I just say, to quote Reverend Phyllis, and to talk about a faith-based parable, that small beginnings lead to heaven. We are the mustard seeds. We in this room are the mustard seeds. So we are gonna work to grow tall. Do you know a mustard seed can grow up to 20 feet tall? You know how big mustard seeds are, right? They're tiny. They grow to 6 feet, 12 feet, 20 feet. Some of them grow up to 30 feet tall. You are the mustard. Each one of you is a mustard seed. Let's go out, plant ourselves, and do not be moved.
That's right. Thank you. I think it will remind us that every single right that we have nowadays for women were resulted from women's work, right? So we are just continue. Yeah, but we will continue struggling.
Thank you. I'll just pick on the question around what happens in the home when we recognize the care economy, not the care economy, but recognize the unpaid care that women and girls provide. Well, research shows that, you know, for men to be involved in the care of their children, that improves their relationship, their bond to their children. And, you know, we focus on women and girls at the same time, our current economic employment, you know, production models, consumption models, place an onus on men as well to be working out of the home, to be providing financially. So they also want to be involved in the care of their children. And that is something that we need to be taking into account when we are rethinking our economic and care systems. And then, you know, health outcomes improve when you have support, because care is not only childcare. It's not only the fun of dealing with healthy children while we're waiting for them to grow up and go to school. There are other forms of care that are very demanding on the carer's health, their mental health. So there are multiple benefits that we can derive from recognizing and redistributing care work at home.
In addition to at home, maybe I also want to add something about what should happen at the state level. So once we recognize what is the situation at home, we also think about the public policies that have led to those situations. And many times it's more profitable for families, for women to be left behind because women's pay is not equitable to men, and a lot of time a payment on a house is less expensive than getting childcare, for example, where women can actually continue to have economic emancipation. We also need to think about what systems are there, what social protection system, what school systems are there. All of these multi-social and multi-economic factors, once we recognize the unfair burden that has been put on women, that gets us to think about what needs to change structurally for women to stop bearing the burden of this unsustainable GDP-led growth models. What is a priority to me and opportunities in the HLPF to the Summit of the Future moment is to really look at the international financial architecture chapter of the pact or discussion as a whole, to think about questions of debt and tax and climate finance and care economy and women's rights in a way that is based on obligations, on rights and duties, rather than charities or technocratic, so to speak, directions or answers that come from the inherited dogmas that have led us to what we are today, and specifically look at the OTE, so the obligations, the ex-ETOs, extraterritorial obligations around SDG 16 and 17.
I think there's a big difference between the care economy and unpaid care work. But I also get a little nervous. I don't know if you remember wages for housework.
Yeah.
The early strategies coming from a number of women's organizations was actually advocating wages for housework. And, you know, in the current system, we also know it as can be minimum wage. I mean, that is not the answer. And I think the other part of all of that, that's the bigger problem for me, and which is really something to be concerned about, is by using that approach, we're more or less saying the market approach is the answer. That it's about the only way we value things is if it has a market. And I think that's the last part of actually the problem we have to resist, which is why I think the commodification of everything, I mean, we're seeing a lot of this going on with the environment, in the commerce trade, that just makes it all more and more. Economics is determining everything. And I feel like this has to be completely turned on its head. And that basically what we're saying is we need to see accountability of economic decisions, how money is used, raised, etc., to meet a whole slew of human rights, frankly. And so I think the comment that some of the comments that are coming here with regard to that, it's this decision-making process, because otherwise, to me, the fundamental issue that should be guiding everything is reducing inequalities. Income inequalities, non-income inequalities, which are the fundamental discriminations across the board, and wealth inequalities. We are nowhere on that. And so that is how the whole economic process needs to work. And so until we've got that accountability at any level, whether it's at the local communities, whether it's national and cross-border. And that's where some of the alerts that we've been hearing today are really, really serious. We've got to watch out because everybody is active in, some people are very busy trying to, not deliberately increase inequalities, but very happy to be the beneficiaries of the increased inequality.
So thank you. I think it was a beautiful way to close with Barbara reminding us that the commodification of our rights, it's not a solution, right? Exactly. So I think that the message, the final message of this panel is really that women's inequality is not a destiny, right? So we will not give up until we get the cities of making decisions that impact our lives, but the lives of everyone in this planet. And until we are able to make sure that the economy will be used to fulfill our rights and not in the opposite way, right? So that's where we are. We thank you, all of you, for participating. All organizations that brought together this space, and we will continue because then we are moving to the summit in September, Summit of the Future. There will be also the conference on the social.
We're out of time. There's two more. The Summit of the Future can only do so much, and we have to make sure it doesn't go in the wrong direction. Then there are two more, financing for development, more so. There's the Second World Summit on Social Development, and that's which defines our content. So that is